All right, welcome to the ES6 track. So today I'm going to be referencing slides.com/javascriptla/guide to ES6. So for this video, I'm going to put the link to the slides at the bottom of the video, and we'll try to go through as much of the slides as we can. I'm going to take a longer time with these slides just because I can, and I think that will be beneficial to a lot of people watching this. I know when I do the meetups, it actually is a little bit faster, and so people don't really get as much time to digest. But with this particular video series, I'm actually going to go a lot slower, so that way people can really have the chance to understand each thing. And we'll go over a lot. I think it'll be fun. It'll be a good refresher. I'm actually going to skip over to the agenda here. And I'm going to basically go through as much of this as I can. We may actually skip the tooling part because I feel like that might be actually a little complicated, and we might actually save this towards a different video series because I think that it's its own playlist, if you will. However, I'll try to make it as simple as possible to follow along. Even newbies can sort of follow along. I do have some basic recommendations or qualifications for people starting out. If you haven't done any kind of JavaScript before, I really don't recommend this particular playlist just yet because I may be doing things that are too advanced for you, especially when I get into using a lot of functions and promises, generators, iterators, fetch, async, await. So if you have no idea how to code, you've never done any kind of coding before, I do recommend a more basic beginner track. And as soon as I have that, I will put a link to it in the video too, so that you can check that out. However, if you've done some basic coding and you understand things like if statements, setting variables, as well as maybe using a function, I think you'd be good to go. It doesn't take a really long time to learn JavaScript. I actually think it's pretty straightforward. You can probably finish most of the basics, especially learning how to just create variables, use functions to compare things. If statements to compare things, and then functions to basically do actions. You can probably get through that in 2 hours, especially if you just watch some other video on YouTube, or maybe you do a class that has a very basic beginner thing. You can even read a book online or probably go through some tutorials, maybe W3 Schools or MDN. Those are the places that I would recommend going and checking out beginner JavaScript. But yeah, it shouldn't take you that long. It should probably take you, even if it takes you a longer time, like a full day or 2 days, you should probably be able to do it within the week. And then you can come back to this. Okay, so with that having been said, let's go ahead and turn our attention to how to get started with me. So I'm going to rely on Node.js, which is a runtime environment for JavaScript. It basically gives you JavaScript out of the box. I don't have to work with a browser to do some of my JavaScript. Typically, when people do coding, they do it for a code editor like VS Code or Sublime Text or Atom, and then they try to do the coding there, and then they look at their results in a browser. We're not going to do that. We're actually going to use the console instead, which is a little bit easier. Once you learn things in the console, then you can take that same knowledge and apply it to the browser with some tooling. And that's what I'm actually referring to when I say tooling. Again, it is a little bit more complicated to set up ES6 within the browser, but with Node.js, a lot of ES6 sort of comes out of the box. Not everything, but for our purposes, doing part of this particular section, we can do it in the command line. All right, so hope you understand all that, and let's go ahead and move forward. I'm going to say that my terminal probably looks a lot different from your terminal, and that's just because I've customized it a lot. I have Z shell running. I have a purple skin on top of it. If you're interested in these things, I'll have another video link that shows you how to do a little bit more customization. But for the most part, you can do this tutorial with any kind of console. Like if you're on Windows, you can use command prompt as long as you have git bash installed. And git bash will allow you to use Linux or Mac style kind of notation, right? And that's also another video that I can put out a link to. If you're not really sure how to do that, I'll put one out for Windows. But that said, it is pretty straightforward. It's pretty easy to do. And then for Mac people using Mac, you may use the utilities, and you can use the terminal that comes built in with Mac. I chose here to use iTerm2, which I really like. It allows me to do a lot more customization, and I recommend checking that out as well. And for Windows, you can use something called Commander. That's pretty cool. It's similar to iTerm, and it allows you to customize your terminal as well. And then finally, if you're a really powerful user at Windows, then you probably don't need this explanation, but you can also use PowerShell, which is actually pretty awesome. So you can use whatever you like to follow along. The main thing that I really recommend, though, is that you download Node.js from nodejs.org, and then you can get the recommended version here. If you want this version, which comes with more features, go ahead, but that may actually sort of prevent you from working with other libraries in JavaScript, especially if they're not caught up to the most current version of JavaScript. And that happens quite often. We'll talk about that all later in other playlists, but for now I recommend for everybody using Node, especially for this particular track, let's just use the basic version. Okay, so you can check that you have Node after you've installed it on your command line by just typing node and then -v like that. And I actually do have a more current version of Node, but I'm aware of what I'm doing. So essentially, like if my Node doesn't work with some libraries, I know what to do to fix it. And I'll talk about that again, like at a different point. For now, though, I do recommend this version. And my version and your version will definitely work for a lot of the examples that we're doing together. Okay. All right. So with all that said, let's go ahead and type node and then press enter. And then you'll see that I'm inside something called a REPL, essentially. And that just basically allows me to try out code in the Node.js environment and essentially check out what would happen if I ran and executed the code. So read, evaluate, print, that's basically what REPL stands for, read, evaluate, print line. So here I'm going to do a basic example, right? I'm going to say let x is equal to 20, right? So I've essentially said I want to create a variable of type let and or keyword let, right? And I want to basically set it to a value of 20, and this is an integer. And for most cases, I'm just going to work with basic integers, or I'll also work with basic strings. Not too complicate things, because I know that we can make these examples way more complicated than we need to, but for now, let's just keep them simple. Okay, so essentially here I'm saying I want to create a new variable. And just like in math, when you might make a variable in math, you just basically give the variable that you're doing a name, right? So in math, we always use x. We also use y. So I could say let y equal to 40. And then I could sum these two together by saying x plus y. And that gives me 60. I can also write out the console.log command, and I can do x plus y. And that would still give me 60. Because I'm inside Node's environment, I don't have to necessarily use console.log because it is a console. But for most purposes, I'm going to continue using the console.log function anyway, because I feel like if I transfer these skills over to a browser, I'm not going to be working inside of a console. So it is not going to print out 60 by default or any value by default. I have to explicitly tell JavaScript that I want to see it in the console. So I hope you understand that too. That's kind of my basic, requirements for this course, is that we sort of just follow this convention. Okay, so with that said, let's go ahead and jump into the next lecture.